Hey there and welcome. If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed, totally frazzled, or just, burned out, then this is for you. Today, we're going right back to the beginning with a super simple step-by-step guide to understanding what stress really is. Let's get into it. Does any of this sound familiar? Meet Blaine. He's trying to juggle exams, relationship drama, and work, all at the same time. He's exhausted, his mind is racing, and he feels like he's stuck in a hole he can't climb out of. That feeling of pressure coming from every direction, yeah, a lot of us have been there. It's pretty much the classic definition of being stressed. But to really get a handle on it, we've got to understand it first. So here's our game plan for this little tutorial. First, we'll nail down a clear definition. Then, we'll look at the difference between good and bad stress. After that, we'll break down the three main types, figure out where it all comes from, and finally, talk about your next step. All right, let's jump into step one, getting a really solid handle on what we're actually talking about when we use that word stress. Turns out there are two key definitions that really fit together perfectly. First up, we've got the medical or biological point of view. So when your brain senses any kind of threat, it could be a big work deadline or even just a sudden loud noise, it flips a switch. That signal zips down to your adrenal gland, which then floods your system with hormones like cortisol. Now, here's the really fascinating part. In high doses, that cortisol can actually weaken your immune system. That's a huge piece of the puzzle, right? It explains why we so often get sick when we're under a ton of pressure. Now let's look at it from a different angle, the psychological one. A researcher named Richard Lazarus put it this way: stress is the feeling you get when you believe that the demands you're facing are way bigger than your ability to handle them. So the key takeaway here is it's not just about what's happening to you. It's about your own perception of whether you've got what it takes to cope. And it's that feeling of being overwhelmed that triggers the whole biological reaction we just talked about. See how they're connected? And that brings us to a really interesting idea. We usually think of stress as this big, bad villain we need to get rid of. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? It turns out not all stress is created equal. This idea was really pushed forward by Hans Selye, one of the absolute pioneers in stress research, way back in 1956. He argued that stress itself isn't the problem. What really matters is the situation and, more importantly, how we see it. It just goes to show you how powerful our own mindset can be. So let's break that down. On one side, you've got beneficial stress. Think about the buzz you feel before a big presentation that pushes you to be your best, or the pressure of a deadline that fuels your creativity. That's stress acting as a motivator. But then, on the other side, you've got detrimental stress. This is the kind that comes from constant failure, humiliation, or worry. That's the stuff that just grinds you down and becomes truly harmful. Okay, on to step two. To really manage stress, you kind of have to know what you're dealing with first. And psychologists have broken it down into three main categories. So what are they? We've got acute stress, episodic acute stress, and chronic stress. And trust me, they each hit us in very different ways. First, there's acute stress. This is by far the most common type. It's that immediate, in-the-moment stress you feel from something that just happened, or something you're worried is about to happen. Like rushing to meet a deadline or getting into a tiny fender bender. The symptoms hit you right away, a headache, a pounding heart, but they usually fade once the situation is over. Next, we have episodic acute stress. This is what happens when those short bursts of stress aren't just a once-in-a-while thing. They become a regular part of your life. It's almost like a lifestyle of stress. You're always rushing, always feeling disorganized and overloaded. And because it's constant, the symptoms are more persistent, like ongoing headaches or even high blood pressure. And finally, there's chronic stress. This is the most serious one because it's just relentless. It's that grinding, long-haul stress that can go on for months or even years. It comes from really tough situations like deep poverty, a toxic family environment, or being stuck in a job you hate. And what's really dangerous is that because it's always there, people can get used to it. They might not even realize the serious damage it's quietly doing to their health. Okay, for our final step, let's talk about where all this stress actually starts. Being able to recognize the triggers or stressors in your own life is absolutely key to getting some control back. A lot of our biggest stressors are waiting for us right at home.
Sometimes it's ongoing stuff, like constant arguments or money troubles. Other times, it's those huge life events, like a divorce or even a marriage, which, even though it's a happy thing, it's still a massive change, and that brings a ton of pressure with it.
And then, of course, there's work. Intense pressure, impossible deadlines, tricky relationships with your boss or coworkers, working crazy hours. These are all classic workplace stressors. And just like with marriage, even something good like a promotion can bring a whole new level of stress into your life. So we did it. We've defined stress, we looked at the good versus the bad, and we've identified the different types and their triggers. We've built a really solid foundation here. But, knowledge is only really powerful when you do something with it. And that leads us to the final and, honestly, the most important question. Now that you have this new way of looking at things, the question isn't just what is stress anymore. It's what are you going to do about it? What's one small, totally manageable step you can take today? Not to get rid of stress, because that's impossible, but just to start managing it in a healthier way. Really think about it. That's where the journey. All right, let's talk about stress. Today, we're going to open up your brain's built-in toolkit for dealing with it. And these aren't just, abstract ideas. We're talking about real, tangible, science-backed tools that are based on the way you're already hardwired. We all know that feeling, right? When stress just feels totally overwhelming, like you're just a passenger on a runaway train. But what if you could actually take the controls? What if you had a built-in off switch? Well, it turns out you do. It's like having an emergency brake you can pull anytime you need it. So here's our game plan for building out this toolkit. First, we're going to reframe stress as a signal. Then we'll find that emergency brake for real-time relief. After that, we'll talk about how to raise your overall stress threshold. And finally, we'll get into preventing chronic burnout. All right, let's jump right into section 1. We're calling this stress is a signal because, and this is really important, it's not the enemy we often make it out to be. So what is it then? Well, at its core, stress is just a generic, hardwired signal. Think of it like a biological alarm system. It's only there for one reason, to get your brain and body mobilized to do something. It's just a call to action. It's not a bug in your system. Okay, so if stress is a call to action, what do you do when that call is just, screaming at you, when it feels overwhelming? That brings us to our second tool, your emergency brake. This is the one you pull when that wave of stress really hits. And what's so incredible about this is that the remote control for your entire nervous system, it's been with you this whole time. It's your breath. Yeah, seriously. You can directly, intentionally control your heart rate and by extension your stress level just by changing how you breathe. So here's the nuts and bolts of how this works. When you take a breath in, your diaphragm moves down. Your heart actually gets a little bigger, and that slows down blood flow. So your brain speeds up your heart to compensate. Then, when you exhale, the complete opposite happens. Your diaphragm moves up, your heart gets a bit smaller, blood flow quickens, and your brain tells your heart, okay, time to slow down. So think of it this way. Inhaling is the gas pedal, and exhaling, that's the brake. Okay, so how do we actually use this brake? It's with a technique called the physiological sigh, and it's so simple. Here's what you do. You take a deep inhale through your nose, and then right when you think you're full, sneak in a second, shorter little inhale. That's the key part. It pops open all the little air sacs in your lungs. And then you just let it all out with a long, slow, controlled exhale through your mouth. And here's the best part, right? You don't need to go find a quiet room and meditate for 20 minutes. Just 1 to 3 of these physiological sighs can completely and rapidly shift your state. It just calms that feeling of high alert and brings your stress level way down. Now look, this isn't just some wellness fad. This is grounded in your body's actual mechanics. The neuroscientist Andrew Huberman puts it plainly. He says, it's the fastest way to bring down your level of stress very fast. I mean, just imagine being in a super high-pressure environment, like in a hospital. This is a tool you can use in literal seconds, in between seeing patients or right before a tough procedure, to just totally reset your nervous system. All right, so now we have a tool for putting out the fire in the moment. That's huge. But what about making ourselves a little more fireproof over time? How can we become more resilient? Well, that brings us to our third section, raising your stress threshold. So here's something wild that happens when you get hit with a jolt of stress. Your pupils actually dilate and your field of vision physically narrows.
It's called tunnel vision. Your brain literally locks your focus onto whatever it thinks the threat is. Now that's great if you're, running from a lion, but it's not so helpful when the threat is a tough email or complex problem you need to solve.
But here's the cool part, the trick. You can consciously flip that switch by doing something called panoramic vision. Basically, deliberately widening your field of view, you send a direct signal to your brainstem that says, hey, we're safe, no immediate danger here. You are literally using your eyes to tell your brain to calm down.
And it's really easy to do. You just soften your gaze, kind of relax your eyes, and just try to see more of your environment at once without moving your head. Use your peripheral vision. It's a super powerful way to separate that feeling of mental panic from the physical jitters. And here's a pro tip for you. Practice this while you're exercising. When your heart is already pumping, deliberately widen your gaze. What you're doing is training your brain to be calm even when your body is all fired up. And that is what raises your stress threshold over time. So these tools are fantastic for handling stress in the moment and for building that long-term resilience. But what happens when the stress just doesn't stop, when it becomes chronic? That's what our final section is all about, preventing burnout by learning to spot the warning signs. And this is such a critical question, right, for all of us, because in our crazy busy lives, feeling stressed can just feel normal. So where is the line? How do you know when you've tipped over from just regular acute stress into something that's chronically unhealthy? The dividing line is simple. It's sleep. Think about it. You should be able to shake off a stressful day and recover overnight. But when you can't get good quality sleep anymore, when that stress alarm just refuses to turn off, even at night, that is the absolute clearest signal that you're moving from manageable stress into the real danger zone of chronic stress. So, okay, what's the long-term maintenance plan for bringing things back into balance? It really comes down to 3 non-negotiable pillars. First, quality sleep. That is the absolute foundation for getting that stress response to turn off. Second, regular exercise. We know this helps regulate stress hormones and it builds that resilience we were just talking about. And third, and this one's huge, social connection. Getting together with people you care about activates serotonin, which makes you feel good, makes you feel safe, and it directly fights back against the long-term damage that stress can do. So there you have it. The tools are literally already built right into your biology. You've got the physiological sigh for that instant calm down, you've got panoramic vision to raise your stress threshold, and you have the foundational pillars of sleep, exercise, and connection for your long-term health. Your body already has the complete toolkit. The only question left is, which one are you going to use first?